Goddess Beauties, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and today we're combining two of my favorite things, narrated stories, true crime, and nail tutorials. Please be advised that the content on this channel includes detailed descriptions of true crime, mystery, and murder stories which may be distressing or triggering to some viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised, particularly for those sensitive to graphic depictions of violence, discussion of traumatic events, and mature themes. If you or someone you know is affected by any of the issues discussed, please consider seeking support from a professional. Now let's get into the story. The unsettling case of the Midnight Strangler is one of the most chilling and perplexing unsolved mysteries of the 20th century, a true crime story that continues to haunt the minds of investigators and armchair detectives alike. The story begins in a quiet Midwestern town, Oak Ridge, in the late 1970s, a place where doors were rarely locked and neighbors knew one another. It was the kind of town where the thought of violent crime seemed far away, almost unthinkable, but in the summer of 1978, everything changed. The first murder occurred on a sweltering night in late June. Martha Wallace, a 27-year-old local librarian, was found strangled to death in her home. The crime scene was bizarre, no signs of forced entry, no clear struggle, and her home had not been ransacked. The only thing out of place was Martha's body, lying in bed as if she had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. But the bruising on her neck and the forensic analysis confirmed that she had been manually strangled to death, and rigor mortis indicated the crime occurred around midnight. Her face was eerily serene, with no defensive wounds on her body. Whoever the killer was, he had been calm and methodical. The town was shaken, but hopeful that this was an isolated incident. There was no immediate evidence to suggest otherwise, and the police, while troubled by the lack of clues, worked tirelessly to solve the case. However, just a few weeks later, the nightmare escalated. On July 17th, a second victim was found. This time it was Ellen Carter, a 32-year-old school teacher. Like Martha Wallace, Ellen had been strangled in her own bed, with no signs of forced entry. Her body was discovered by a neighbor after she failed to show up for work. Ellen had been a beloved figure in the community, and her murder left the town reeling in fear. The similarities to Martha's case were undeniable. Both women were single, lived alone, and had been killed in the dead of night. The media quickly latched onto the story, and the killer was dubbed the Midnight Strangler. As the summer wore on, fear gripped the town of Oak Ridge. Women started locking their doors and windows, buying extra locks, and even guard dogs. The police were baffled. They conducted interviews, set up roadblocks, and increased patrols, but there were no witnesses, no obvious suspects, and no clues that could lead to the identity of the killer. Despite their efforts, the strangler remained at large. The killer's next victim came only 3 weeks after Ellen Carter's murder. On August 8, 1978, Jane Holloway, a 24-year-old waitress, was found dead in her apartment, strangled in the same manner as the previous victims. Like the others, there was no forced entry, and Jane's face had the same unsettling calmness as if she hadn't resisted her attacker at all. The police now had 3 identical murders on their hands, but no closer to solving the mystery. A pattern began to emerge. The killer seemed to strike every 3 to 4 weeks, always targeting women who lived alone. He always entered their homes without leaving a trace, and the murders were always committed at or near midnight. Some theorized that the killer may have been watching his victims for days or even weeks before striking, learning their routines and finding the perfect opportunity to enter undetected. As the investigation dragged on, more disturbing theories surfaced. Some believed the Midnight Strangler might be a local, someone with access to the women's homes, possibly even someone they knew. Others speculated that the killer was a professional of some sort, possibly a locksmith or a handyman who had access to the women's homes and knew how to enter without leaving any sign of forced entry. Despite the fear that had engulfed the town, the police were still no closer to catching the killer, and in early September, the Midnight Strangler struck again. This time, it was Linda Parker, a 29-year-old nurse who was found dead in her home. Once again, the same modus operandi, strangled in her bed, no forced entry, and a calm, unresisting victim. By now, the town of Oak Ridge was in full panic. Women were leaving town, taking leaves of absence from work, or moving in with friends or family for safety. Some even hired private security. Local stores sold out of deadbolts, window alarms, and anything else that might offer a sense of protection. The fear was palpable, and the once quiet town had become a place of paranoia and dread. With 4 murders in as many months, the FBI was called in to assist with the investigation. Profilers were brought on board, and a psychological profile of the killer was developed. They believed the Midnight Strangler was likely a white male in his late 20s to early 40s, someone who was intelligent, methodical, and familiar with the Oak Ridge area. They theorized that he may have had a traumatic experience with a woman in his past, possibly a rejection or a failed relationship, which triggered his need to exert control over his victims. The fact that there were no signs of sexual assault in any of the cases suggested that the murders were not driven by sexual desire, but rather by the need for dominance and power. Then, just as suddenly as the murders had begun, they stopped. After Linda Parker's death, no more victims appeared. Weeks passed, then months, and eventually years. Despite an exhaustive investigation, the Midnight Strangler was never caught and no new leads emerged. In the years that followed, many theories circulated about the identity of the Midnight Strangler. Some believed he had been a transient who moved through Oak Ridge and left town after the last murder. Others thought he might have been someone who had died, possibly in a car accident or by suicide, which explained why the killings had stopped so abruptly. There were even rumors of secret suspects, prominent men in the community whose names were quietly floated around but never publicly disclosed. Some of the most chilling evidence came from the psychological profiler's notes, which suggested that the Midnight Strangler had a pathological need to control his victims to the point where they wouldn't resist. They theorized that he may have used some form of sedation, a charm, or even hypnosis to calm them before strangling them. The calm, peaceful expressions on their faces suggested that they didn't struggle, which only added to the eerie nature of the case. Despite advances in forensic technology and cold case investigations, the Midnight Strangler's identity has never been uncovered. His methodical nature, lack of evidence, and sudden disappearance from Oak Ridge left investigators puzzled for decades. To this day, the case remains unsolved, a haunting reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who disappear into the night without a trace. Thanks for sticking around for this nail tutorial while we dive into some intriguing stories. If you enjoyed this blend of beauty and narrated stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss out on our unique content. Share your nail art results and favorite moments from today's story in the comments below. Until next time, stay creative and stay curious.
Hey goddess babes, sanitary is extremely important, so always clean before and after you complete a nail set, whether it's for yourself or your client.